Cycling for me has never been about the bikes. They've only ever been the prerequisite tool. I do not see just a bike race, I see riders on heroic journeys and warriors doing battle. At one point, cycling was the most popular sport in Europe because newspapers told magnificent tales about epic races and crafted the great champions into legends. But with the advent of television, cycling lost some of its mystique, and that golden age of journalism and narration has perished. So now let us try to return some romance to the beautiful sport. Let us praise and give glory to phenomenal performances to be remembered for decades to come. Let us dwell on the moments that inspire and move us. Let us chronicle the rise and fall of heroes. Let us chart these life-changing journeys, these cycling odysseys. All right, welcome back to another episode of Cycling Odysseys. I'm your host, Patrick Santino. Today, so the last one, I put out a primer of the cycling season. Forgot to make the intro and the outro, and I didn't end up having time, so I just put it out there. Anyways, today we are recapping what I'm calling kind of the first early season smorgasbord of races. There was definitely enough that I could have already done one of these before, but I'll get into why I didn't in a second. This one's much more laid back and, I don't know, kind of standard or easy, just because the beginning of the season is pretty standard and easy, right? It's really not, but it is more laid back, right? So with that, let's just jump into it. You guys will get the picture. 2022, the early season smorgasbord number 1. With the thrust and climax of the cyclocross season over and the precipitous falling action beginning with only dawns and sunsets passing since the World Championships, it is time to turn our attention to the road. Alas, with no Tour Down Under again this year, the early season smorgasbord begins in the laid-backest of styles. The faux high and mighty language can be dialed down. Events can be related plainly, mouth to mouth. Now, you will say, Patrick, the cycling early season has already been going for weeks. Yes, that is true. But with all due respect to Aussie Nats, the Santos Festival, the Majorca Challenge, and the GP Marseillaise, for me, they were entirely overshadowed by the January Cross. Congrats to Ineos's Luke Plapp. You rode with wisdom and guts well beyond your age to win the Aussie Championship so young. I'm not going to lie. For the past 2 years, I've had zero interest to watch whatever this Santos Festival is. It just seems a poor man's Tour Down Under. And low-key, the Tour Down Under itself is in need of a massive facelift anyways. In theory, I like the Majorca Challenge, but in practice, watching their highlights package is always a waste of my time. And the GP Marseillaise is always the day of Cyclocross Worlds itself. And so it is one of the biggest afterthoughts in my cycling mind. So with all that honestly addressed, maybe some are now reminded of the Talladega Nights with all due respect joke. So be it. Let's move on. The early season in cycling is the preseason of the sport in almost every respect except in one massive way. These races still count. I believe they do indeed count for whatever wonky UCI point system has been created that will leave 2 World Tour teams relegated at the season's end. But that is beyond my pay grade of nothing to dive into yet. Maybe I will towards the end of the season, when we have a clue who will be relegated and who will move up. But don't hold your breath. What actually tangibly matters is the psychological importance of starting off the cycling season well. These wins count. The most massive GC riders probably do not care or need wins, and definitely not some UCI points, though they will want to put in good performances. But for the sprinters, they almost need to start the season hot, or at least on the right foot to boost their confidences for the real objectives that will come upon them all too soon. So with that in mind, let us crisscross the globe on a daily basis and sample the international flavor of cycling as if it were a charcuterie smorgasbord. The most exotic first, the Saudi Tour. I did not watch a minute of it the past 2 years, but I figured I'd give this 5th or 6th Middle Eastern race a try because it sounded like enough World Tour teams were attending, and so I figured the lineup would be pretty legit. It sounds like in previous years it was 100% a sprint fest, but instead this year they added a little variation. The race was based around the Alola Old Town, which is surprisingly on the Red Sea side of the country, unlike the other oil-bearing countries, which are concentrated on the Persian Gulf side of Arabia. Anyways, Based on opening montage highlight packages and scenery throughout the race, the Alua Old Town location is an archaeological and probably geological hub. I won't say Mecca, because the real Mecca is actually remotely nearby. The location seemed an interesting ancient corridor of human history, but the touristy resort feel with no fans came up short for me, as most Middle Eastern races usually do. All of that to say, the Saudi tour fits the standard par for the Middle Eastern races. Good weather, convenient lodging, good enough racing to pique my interest in February after an off-season of road cycling. Stage 1 was extraordinarily lame as broadcasting issues, and all we saw was the final full bunch sprint won by Lotto Soudal's Caleb Ewan. In the race's defense, we probably did not need any more than that for this day. But Stage 2 actually made up for the Stage 1 mess with a pretty badass little steep climb that finished in the middle of nowhere. The climb was steep. The wind and landscape were harsh. I figured old Ben Kenobi could have walked out from behind one of the Tatooine-looking desert rock formations. A young Colombian, Santiago Buitrago, got Bahrain Victorious' season off right with a big win on the hard finish, against pretty good competition, who were all on the limit. Stage 3 was a rather boring affair, with lone Anthony Turgis of Total Energy putting in a hard day of training in a solo break block headwind, which increased my excitement to see Total Energy's classic squad go to work. The finishing sprint of that Stage 3 was fine. Dylan Groenewegen took a good first win for Team Bike Exchange, who are coming off their crappiest season ever. But sadly, UAE's Fernando Gaviria came up flat, and though Ewan came up like lightning in the finale, he was way too far back, and Groenewegen took the win easily. Stage 4 was the Queen Stage, billing the climb as the Saudi Angleroo. Hype and expectations that, of course, cannot be lived up to, but were counterbalanced by the routine simplicity and low bar expectations of the early season. The stage actually proved very difficult, for this was the day crosswinds ripped the peloton into echelons, and most were already on their hands and knees for this final 4-kilometer Angleroo-esque climb. It was very steep. The gradients were solidly above 15% for a kilometer or two straight, and the maximum gradient of 22% made many of the riders appear to be too far out of shape to even be racing yet. Over the top was an interesting 8-kilometer flat ride across a skyview plateau that reminded me of Canyonlands National Park in Utah, with its island in the sky scenic drive. So I enjoyed the finish. As I said, the climb was tough enough to make the riders look like amateurs, but someone had to win. 2 riders rose to the top. Lotto's young Maxim Vangelis and Quickstep's Andrea Baggioli. Baggioli, usually pegged as a hardman sprinter, looked good, but was in a tough spot for his beloved Quickstep teammate Tim de Klerk the Tractor was in the best position on GC. And to take a GC win of any professional stage race would be a great reward in the career of this big, selfless tractor. But ultimately, the climb defeated Baggioli. Maxim Vangelis got away solo to time trial across the Skyview to the finish to take the victory. Once Tim de Klerk was over the climb, he regrouped well, but he was stuck in a group of leeches he could not shake to put a solo dent into Vangelis' lead that now had GC implications. Additionally, behind, Santiago Buitrago and his Bahrain team made a remarkable recovery on the climb after botching the echelon splits earlier in the race. Buitrago's squad caught all the way up to the de Klerk group. But, all being 40 seconds behind the winner, Maxim Vangelis had enough time in hand to take the GC lead and win overall, for he did not relinquish the lead the next day on the final flat sprint. And the final sprint on Stage 5 was much like Stage 3. Bike Exchange and Groenewegen got it right to take victory again, but this time Caleb Ewan did not contest as he punctured with 2.7 kilometers to go. Fernando Gaviria looked better than Stage 3, but was solidly outclassed by Groenewegen, which I do not think would be the case if Gaviria were still at Quickstep. And no cycling fan can even think that is a ludicrous proposition. Fernando, find your mojo. You were one of the most fun and dynamic riders in the peloton back in your Quickstep days. On to Europe and the fair weather Mediterranean races. Last year, I watched the Étoile des Bessages for the first time, for it was the first time 3 other races did not clash with it. In fact, last year, it was the only race in that week's slot, for the rest were canceled by corona lockdowns. But even with last year's beefed-up lineup, I was honestly still unimpressed with this race. The climbs weren't very exciting, no one was yet in good shape, it just looked like any other standard French race with no fans, except it was a little colder. But I rewatched this year because having it on as background noise fit well with my schedule, and again, the lineup of riders sounded good. Also, somewhere on Twitter, I found out Étoile means star, And in the race's early years, the 5 stages supposedly formed a star around the town of Bessages. And you gotta admire people for that. This year was also a lot better race. And looking back over the stage winners, it seems they really shafted the sprinters. Trek's Mads Pedersen took an excellent first win of the season on a tricky, steep hilltop finish that was so tough it took proper timing to win up it. The next day, Brian Coquard started off his Cofidis career right with a great win, edging out Mads Pedersen on another grueling little finishing hill. The hill wasn't as tough as the finish the day before, but it certainly wasn't one for the pure sprinters. Cofidis' hot start continued the next day on stage 3 after a dynamic hilly stage that was won by their rider Benjamin Thomas, a few seconds ahead of EF's Alberto Bettiol and UNOX's Tobias Johannesson. Stage 4, the Queen stage, finished on a proper hard 4.6 kilometer climb called Le Mans Bouquet. Gradients pitched up to average above 10% at points, and the riders with the best legs came to the fore. The win was a shootout between Tobias Johannesson, Jay Vine of Alpecin Phoenix, Antonio Tiberi of Trek Segafredo, and Clemens Champuzan of AG2R Citroën. Tobias Johannesson came out on top to take a first good victory of his career, but he did not manage to take the leader's jersey off of Benjamin Thomas, who finished 23 seconds behind. All thought Richard Carapaz or some other Ineos Grenadier would have been a bigger factor in this race, but they were not. In Carapaz's defense, he had a nasty crash on stage 3. Finally, the traditional stage 5 time trial that always finishes with a tough little climb to the Notre Dame de Mayence church was won, surprise, surprise, by Filippo Ganna, the reigning time trial world champion. Alberto Bettiol managed to overhaul Johannesson to finish second on GC, but Benjamin Thomas, the French TT champion, beat them both to clinch the overall victory. But again, to be honest, at both the Saudi Tour and Étoile de Bessages, the overall race was barely on my radar. This, however, was not the case at the Volta a la Comunità Valenciana, where bona fide Grand Tour GC stars have always stretched their legs in the early season. I've watched Valenciana ever since they brought it back in 2016 when Wout Poels, now of Bahrain Victorious, took an unexpectedly great win. And the next year, in 2017, Nairo Quintana, now of Arkea Samsic, took a badass, dominant victory up one of those classic Spanish goat track climbs. This year, the route did not disappoint again. The first stage hopped right into the mountains. It was an interesting skirmish up the final climb, but after some attacks and counterattacks, Quickstep's wonderkid Remco Evenepoel the Hummingbird counterattacked everyone with the most perfect timing on the final crux of the climb. He sailed away with ease, and though the climb crested with 4.5 kilometers to go to the finish, the final rolling hills were only more to his advantage. Remco time trials so smoothly and effortlessly, and yet his diminutive figure is still so powerful and laser accurate, zipping through the wind. It is for these reasons he looks every bit the Hummingbird to me. Remco won stage 1 easily, and the only one on the outer edge of his solar system was Bora Hansgrohe's new transfer, Alexander Vlasov. Stage 2 was a flat sprinter's day, and Quickstep Alpha Vinyl went 2 for 2, leading out Fabio Jakobsen to victory. But then came stage 3, the Queen stage of the race. As I said, a big problem with Saudi or Bessages or other lesser races is that they often are not compelling strung together narratives, and I do not at all watch for the GC. I am only rooting for good individual stages each day. Meanwhile, Valenciana always has at least 2 very proper GC days out of 5, instead of the usual 1 to 1.5 GC days other early season races supply. Stage 3 finished on a newfound goat track climb that must surely be auditioning for the Vuelta, the Antinis del Magno. Of course, containing steep gradients, but notably also containing 2 kilometers of gravel that is now all the rage. Somewhat to our surprise, Remco looked to be on the ropes early in the climb as Movistar's Valverde and Mas pushed the pace with Israel Premier Tech's Fuglsang. We all remember Remco's Giro last year, and that lengthy unraveling began on the Strada stage. But Remco began to hold his own on the gravel this day. He maneuvered back all the way up to the front and started dictating pace. Remco the Hummingbird looked to have mastered the uphill gravel at least. And yet still the stage was not over. For only a few seconds later, Alexander Vlasov dared try his luck. So steep was the gravel road, Vlasov could only attack seated. But with his but with this attack, he burst open the race. Remco tried to follow, but could not. And worse, he bonked or totally cracked, while everyone else just named tried to limit their losses or continue at the highest pace they could. But Vlasov did not let up until the line. He took the race lead and held the leader's jersey over the next 2 sprint days to win the Valenciana overall. Sure, Remco must have been upset to lose out, but it is still the early season, and he still had jobs he could do. On the next 2 preceding sprint stages, he slotted himself into the renowned Wolfpack leadout train for Jakobsen. With his powerful Hummingbird TT skills, on both days, he was the one who ramped up the pace in the finale through the Flamme Rouge. With 800 meters to go, his job was done, and the last 2 leadoutsmen's work was mostly done for Jakobsen already, as no one could move up. The problem was, on stage 4, Jakobsen was uncharacteristically far out of position, and by the finishing straight, he could not even find a gap to sprint, and the stage went to Trek Segafredo's Matteo Moschetti. But on stage 5, the Wolfpack leadout was perfection. Unpassable Remco with 800 meters to go, a last quick-step accelerator, and then Michael Morkov, the best leadout man in the business, dropped off Fabio Jakobsen in the perfect spot to take the victory. And with that, we come to a couple days off to digest all the meats and cheeses provided by this first early season smorgasbord. I believe next week's board will be leaner or have less variety, but who really knows what exactly the cycling calendar chefs shall serve up and broadcast. All right, and with that, I don't think there's too much more to say on this one. I know Provence is next week, Oman, but I think it's only highlights of Oman. I think there's some races in Spain, and then there's the end of the cyclocross season too. So I might do something for that. Don't hold your breath on anything, but there'll probably be episodes coming out because I want to keep regularly putting out episodes, obviously. Anyways, you can find all this stuff, YouTube, the podcast player, any of the podcast players. Subscribe on those. Leave comments, reviews, 5-star reviews. Thank you for listening, everybody. I'm Patrick Santino. Vive la Ciclisme.